Welcome to the Infrastructure Podcast. My name is Anthony Oliver, and today we're going to focus on public transport and specifically how investment in innovation and in data and digital technologies can underpin a new era of passenger-centric services. Certainly technology is already transforming the way we plan our travel and the way we use public and private transport services, but the goal goes wider and it goes deeper. The goal is to create a truly interconnected transport experience to provide greater access to transport to deliver more reliable, more effective end-to-end transport solutions for all, and to make those services a total delight to use. Creating a public transport system so good that it makes any decision to use the car seem utter madness, as my recent podcast guest Rory Sutherland put it. Whether this is through enabling truly integrated ticketing, providing better service information, boosting the efficiency of maintenance, or underpinning a new breed of micro-mobility solutions, data and digital systems will be at the heart of our future transport services. However, it remains unclear how all this tech will shape the passenger experiences of the future, not least as transport evolves and funding becomes tighter. So, to help us understand a bit more about these challenges and of course the opportunities, it's my pleasure to welcome Thomas Ableman, Director of Strategy and Innovation at Transport for London, the person who literally is driving innovation and change across the biggest public transport system in the UK and one of the biggest in the world. Well, he is until next month anyway, when he steps away from TfL after 3 years to pursue a new startup business idea, and more about that later, I'm sure. So, Thomas, welcome to the Infrastructure Podcast.
Thank you very much. It's very kind of you to invite me.
It's great to have you here. So, Thomas, set the scene for us. Your role at Transport for London is totally focused on bringing new innovative ideas into one of the world's biggest public transport systems. I introduced some of those challenges and opportunities. So how do you see technology really transforming our public transport systems?
Well, first thing to be clear, my job title is actually Director of Strategy and Innovation. And I don't think it's a coincidence. And I think that's a really important point, because there is this slight tendency sometimes to say, what technology do we need? There's a bit of that in the intro, actually. How do we use data? How do we use digital? That's not the question. The question is, what are we trying to achieve? And one of the things I love about TfL is we've got really clear strategic outcomes we're trying to achieve. We're trying to achieve 80% of journeys in London by public transport and active travel by 2041. And we're trying to achieve 0 deaths, public transport deaths, private transport deaths, road transport deaths by 2041. That's what we are here to do. Then the question becomes, how do we do that? Innovation is a part of that. Innovation does not have to be technology, though it can be, but it's all about thinking through what needs to be true for those goals to be achieved. So, for example, sometimes it's nothing to do with technology. One of the great innovations of TfL is the London Overground, which is saying what has made the London Underground so successful, and how much of that can we apply to above ground mainland rail networks. So, we've seen around 400% growth on the Overground network since it launched. Very, very recently, we had Superloop, which is a new outer London express bus network. It's a fantastic innovation. All it's doing is running buses in a different way, with different branding. But it's undoubtedly innovation. But of course, sometimes it is about new technology if it achieves the goals we're looking to achieve. So one of the things I'm really excited about is e-bikes. I think we're only at the very beginning of what micromobility can do in terms of making public transport and active travel the same thing, solving what has always been called the first mile, last mile problem, and enabling that connectivity. But don't focus on technology or data or digital. Focus on what is needed to achieve exactly what you said earlier, was Rory Sutherland put it, your previous guest, making any decision not to use public transport completely mad.
Okay, no, well, thanks for putting me straight about it. That strategy element, as you say, it's all about better thinking, therefore. And then there's huge amounts of evidence and examples, as you say, of demonstrating how good, how life-changing public transport can be. I mean, the question, therefore, building on that, is what's stopping us?
I think one of the most important things is the point around integration. One of the reasons TfL has been so successful is that it is the world's most integrated transport authority, literally anywhere. TfL is responsible for the tubes, the buses, the trains, the taxi and private hire, the main road networks, the bike hire scheme, everything, including the cable car and the river piers. And that level of integration is almost unique. And if you leave London, you immediately see that lack of integration, really on a physical basis, with bus stations and train stations not connecting up with each other. And certainly in the digital sphere, where it becomes really hard to plan plan journeys, to understand what is available, to understand what is possible. And I find it really frustrating when you go to somewhere where actually the costs are being incurred. There is a bus, it has a driver, it has fuel, all of those costs are being incurred. But someone who's arriving into that town by train simply doesn't understand it, isn't being communicated in a way that is intuitive, easy, simple, so they're probably not going to use it. I think one other really important quick point that's worth mentioning is public transport works really well when it's there. One of the most important decisions that TfL made was during the pandemic not to reduce service, other than literally when necessary because of staff illness, but to keep the timetables running. And in other parts of the country, you've seen services chipped away. You can't use a bus that's not there.
Yeah. I mean, it is an absolute blessing when you live in London to use public transport. And of course, it's something which Manchester and the mayor there, Andy Burnham, is really trying to replicate and not just make it as good, but make it better than London. So, there is a real ambition to try to make that. But of course, one of the challenges is getting, the traditional public sector to work closely and effectively with the entrepreneurial private sector, which, if I read it right, is largely what you're leaving TfL next month to help change. I mean, what is your new venture? Does it have a name, and what's it going to do, and how's it going to help?
Yeah, it will have a name. It will be called Freewheeling, which is the name of a podcast and a blog I used to run before I joined TfL. And I'm sort of spreading that a bit into this business as well. But no, you're absolutely right. One of the things I've really I've had a sort of comparatively unusual career in the sense that I have alternated from highly entrepreneurial organizations into corporate PLC, corporate public sector, and then back into highly entrepreneurial organizations again. And you see a real divergence between the two. The world of startups, entrepreneurship is moving faster and faster. The fastest growing companies on earth tend to be smaller, and the most valuable tend to be younger, and things are getting done more quickly. In the corporate sector, things tend to sometimes feel like they're getting slower, and procurement becomes more challenging, governance becomes more challenging, it's harder to get things done. How can you take things and approaches, ways of working that have been proven to work in the entrepreneurial sector and apply those into corporate organizations that have been around longer, but really feel that burning sense they need to change, they need to do things differently. And you often find the teams in those organizations are desperate to get things done faster. They just need a bit of help, a bit of guidance, a bit of inspiration, a bit of discipline that in the context of everything else, making those changes necessary to move faster are important.
And that's what you're going to be doing. I imagine
Absolutely.
It's going to be an interesting and very, very liberating role. But also you reflected recently in a LinkedIn post I noticed about the unthinkable change to commuting brought about by COVID. As a Londoner, you said it was literally the first time in your life you hadn't used the tube each day. Because you're now returning to startup mode, working from home. Does that mean you're not going to be using the tube yourself anymore? You're going to be hanging out at home all the time and not using the tube?
Absolutely not. No, I will be travelling into town on a daily basis, I expect. I mean, in all seriousness, actually, I joined the public transport sector because I passionately believe in the importance of connectivity, of human beings meeting for work, for business, for pleasure, everything. It's really important. So the work I'll be doing for organisations who want me to support them will largely be in person. I'm not saying I won't be doing some things online, and my business will be administered from the bottom of my garden in a garden studio. But I will be spending a lot of time face to face with people because that's really important.
Well, you say you're not going to be leaving traditional mobility advisory post TfL, and I presume that you will be dealing with the reality of public transport underfunding. You said previously that £29 million to invest in a new bus rapid transit for South East London is great, but it's not when the system needs £500 million in capital funding to replace trains on the Piccadilly line, the second oldest in the UK. I suppose whether it's in London or Manchester or Leeds or Birmingham, is the solution to create decent public transport really one simply of funding?
Funding's part of the answer. And by the way, the Piccadilly line trains are already being replaced. The oldest trains are the Bakerloo line. They're 1 year older than the Piccadilly line trains. We don't currently have any funding to replace the Bakerloo line trains. So they are the oldest trains in the country, and they desperately need replacement. Funding is part of it, but it's not just about money. It's also about long-term certainty. Transport is a capital-intensive business. It operates to long-time horizons. I recently completed a visit to SBB, Swiss State Railways, my counterparts there. I met with their strategy and innovation teams. And one of the really interesting things about, for example, the Swiss model is that there is a rail infrastructure fund and a road infrastructure fund. Those are topped up by dedicated hypothecated taxes every single year, so they know exactly what is going to go into those funds every year. And there is a set formula that churns out an amount to be spent on road enhancement, road maintenance, rail enhancement, rail maintenance every single year. So if you're an organisation like Swiss Railways, you can plan your investment pipeline with absolute certainty. So the 2035 train timetable in Switzerland exists today. They train by train, and they are now in the process of making the infrastructure investments necessary to fulfill that timetable. Where do we need faster lines? Where do we need new bridges? Where do we need new tunnels, etc.? And they're able to plan that pipeline to achieve really specific outcomes in 2035 because they know exactly what their funding envelope is going to be. That means their supply chain can be properly aligned. And of course, it then means that the costs are lower and it's more efficient. And you get that virtuous circle. So obviously, we need properly to invest in transport. We also need to have long-term funding. And then the final point I made earlier is around integration and creating a customer proposition that works, because customers don't think in terms of trains and buses. Outside London, we do have a tendency to operate all of our transport modes, literally from the way the Department of Transport is structured, all the way down to the way operating businesses are structured, in very siloed modes. People make journeys from A to B. And if that level of integration is there, you're more likely to attract people onto public transport. And as public transport costs are fixed, but revenue is variable, that then means that more of the funding can come from the people who pay fares as opposed to from the taxpayer, which makes it more efficient as well.
Yeah. Well, the tube, of course, is 160 years old last year. But transport in London is more than just the tube. And I think, buses are, I'm sure you'll correct me, but I think they're the most commonly used mode. And buses can transform areas all around the country, beyond London. But how do you balance the investment and focus on innovation across, a wide and diverse portfolio, particularly in London, which, the tube naturally sucks up quite a lot of the airtime and the financing?
No, absolutely. The bus network is indeed the biggest used mode in London. In fact, it's the biggest used mode nationwide. The London bus network carries more passengers each year than the entire rail network.
Right.
From Penzance to Aberdeen via the entire London commuter network and all of the other city commuter networks combined. That's the scale.
There you go. Come here for the facts. Come here for the facts.
That's the London bus network. It is phenomenal. And I absolutely agree with you. It's really important that that innovation is balanced, but it needs to be balanced not by jam spread across everything equally, but where are the big opportunities? And I think investing in bus innovation is hugely important. We've got a dedicated bus innovation manager in my team in TfL working constantly on how we can use data to optimize our bus schedules and our bus routes, how we can innovate the bus stop experience, how we can innovate the bus information experience. We've got a trial route on Route 63 where we're testing out different ideas. And I think the bus network has so much growth potential for TfL, a better way of connecting places that otherwise aren't connected, which is what you saw with the Superloop, where we were able to put this new bus network in for out of London with more to come there. It comes back to the point, actually, I said right at the beginning, we shouldn't be about saying, what do we need to do about technology? What do we need to do about data? What do we need to do about digital? Yeah. It's about what do we need to do to achieve the outcomes we're trying to achieve? And here at TfL, we're trying to achieve 80% mode share by public transport and active travel. So what do we need to chase down in order to make that happen?
Yeah. But that said, technology when it comes to buses is vital. I use buses in an area where they come every 6 minutes. In London, I use buses in an area where they come once an hour. And the technology which enables you to know when that bus is going to come and to see it arriving towards you on a map, Uber style, really is it's the core of the decision to take that bus. So that that technology is key to it. And one of the things you said earlier also is that, that public procurement quite often makes innovation hard. And I think you've recently launched the new innovation collaboration framework at TfL to help turn that around. I mean, how can these changes in procurement really help to bring these simple new technology ideas to make the actual wider transport system just be more accessible?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Public procurement, obviously, the rules that have been set up for excellent reasons, and it's really important that taxpayers' money is spent wisely and spent impartially. But we've ended up in a world where it does become very hard to innovate because public procurement rules assume you're buying an object and you can write down a specification for the object and the object gets delivered to you, having had multiple suppliers of that object bid. If you're not buying a defined object, if you're saying, actually, we have a problem we need to solve and we need something that doesn't exist in the market at the moment to solve that problem, and no one can respond to that. They need to work with you. They need to be able to access your data. They need to be able to access your teams in order to co-create with you a solution to your problem. And we can work with someone to co-create that solution. But then, of course, as soon as it exists, it now needs to be publicly procured. Well, how is anyone going to invest the time and effort to really co-creating with us a solution if they then might not win the gig for delivering that solution? It's very hard. So often you end up with public bodies like TfL and many, many others buying what they bought last time, even if it doesn't really solve the problem they're trying to solve. There are many ways around this. Intensive market engagement exercises is one. Developing solutions in-house is another. Long before I joined TfL, TfL did on contactless payments, still the greatest innovation in transport in the last 20 years, which was heavily driven in-house because that's one way of solving that problem. The innovation collaboration framework is another attempt to do that. And what that has seen us do, we launched that very recently, is to create a framework for two market innovators. We procured the market innovators. That's where the impartial public procurement process took place. Now we have procured those market innovators. We are able, within public procurement rules, to co-create solutions with those market innovators, to share data with those market innovators, to share our teams with those market innovators, as long as we're developing something that does not exist in the market at the moment, as long as this is true innovation. And, I won't be here to see the fruits of that, but we've got a lot of engagement taking place at the moment with the companies are Mercedes-Benz and the automotive company and Sopra Steria, the French digital agencies and consultancy, to figure out what it is that we can best use their skills and capabilities to a long list of problem statements that we have defined and offered up to them.
Yeah. But I notice you're also working quite closely with Google, to help them to better understand and translate your timetable into reliable, practical information. Explaining, I suppose, that a 1 minute late train on a 2 minute interval service is not noticeable to passengers. How are you working with a company like Google and really kind of translating these real world issues into things which can make the system run better?
Well, all credit to Google because they have really come to the party on this. They really do seem to want to improve the information that they provide to their customers, but their customers are also our customers. And we've developed, as you say, that's a really good example of something that... Fair enough. Why then? They're not transport people. They might not have occurred to them, but they were being really authentic in publishing delays to our timetable on the underground, showing that a train was 2 minutes late, and therefore it would now be arriving in 3 minutes, and another train was 4 minutes late and therefore be arriving in 5 minutes. But the result of that is still a train every 2 minutes. The customer has absolutely no interest in what the timetable is. No one has ever looked at a tube timetable. They're just interested that there's a train every couple of minutes. And so this information that Google were providing was accurate, but actually misleading because you saw a long list of delays, but the customer experience was that every train was doing exactly what they expected it to do. And they were really supportive about working with their internal product teams to fix that. Similarly, they've totally changed their cycle wayfinding algorithms worldwide based on work that we did with them because the algorithms, they weren't delivering the outcomes needed for our Vision Zero goal. I told you earlier we're trying to achieve zero road deaths on the transport network by 2041, and some of the routes, they were logical routes on a map, but actually they were routing people through junctions that were dangerous, or they were using cycle lanes that, yes, there's a dotted paint cycle lane on the road, but there's a far better cycle lane somewhere else that we have spent millions of pounds putting in place. And it's a slightly longer route, but a far safer, more enjoyable route for the cyclists. So we were able to work with them on what data sets they should be using, showing them where they can find those data sets in order for them to change their algorithms. And it's great because they've really come to the party. And that's such an important part of partnership working, to partner.
Well, anyone that cycles basically knows that you're constantly trying to find the right app, to take you to your destination in the way that you want to go on a bicycle. But anyway, more about that a bit later on. Let's talk a bit about you, Thomas. You started your career at National Express as a graduate trainee, having studied modern history and politics at Oxford. You then moved to spend 7 years at Chiltern Railways. And what led you from modern history and politics into a career in transport?
Yeah, I mean, there was almost like a sort of conveyor belt at the door of Merton College, Oxford, that went to corporate law firms. If you did history, everyone went off to become a corporate lawyer, and I just didn't want to be a corporate lawyer. And I have to say, having run a startup, my lord, you need a good corporate lawyer. So some of my best friends are corporate lawyers, as they say, but it just didn't excite me. And one of the things that I loved about the public transport sector is this sense that it really, really matters to our everyday lives. I was at a friend's wedding at the weekend, and it's amazing wandering around, listening to the conversations taking place. How many people are spontaneously talking about transport, about journeys they're going to make, journeys they have made, their journey today? It's just absolutely central to all of our everydays. It was one of the things that I did find a bit of a shock during the pandemic, actually, when we were able to run society without connecting with each other, because I'd always, a sort of foundational principle that took me into this career was that people meeting people for work, for play is so important. I think the fact that we've returned to it with such gusto subsequently shows that is still the case. So yes, I joined National Express. And as I say, that kind of led me down this path of alternating very corporate and entrepreneurial organizations, and able to sort of understand and see the differences in the way they work, which means that I'm now in this very fortunate position to hopefully assist organizations that want to get things done faster in understanding how they can do that practically. Not kind of lots of slides and diagrams, but what are the practical differences in the way different organizations think about risk, think about how they make decisions, how they build agility into what they do.
So I was going to ask whether you describe yourself as a transport nerd, but would you describe yourself as a practically focused transport nerd then?
Yeah, I think I'll buy that. I'm happy to wear that label.
Okay. Well, before joining TfL in 2021, you spent 5 years driving a transport tech startup, Snap Travel Technology. I think it's a business which attempted to use technology to aggregate and reallocate spare capacity on the coach network. What did you learn from that experience about bringing innovation into transport? And I suppose, what learning are you going to bring into your new venture?
Yeah, I mean, if you want the steepest learning curve in the world, then found a startup, because you learn so much, primarily about yourself and what your strengths and weaknesses are, but about leadership, about economics, about getting things done, about moving quickly,
about the disappointment of not being a millionaire one day.
Yeah,
I think you said basically you were a paper millionaire at one point.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I ever write a book about my time running a startup, it'll be my year as a millionaire, because the business was worth 15 million in 2018. And worth nothing in 2020. 2020 was a very bad year for a business that was predicated on aggregating groups of people, bringing them to one place, and then taking them on a leisure travel journey to another place. Yeah, that our market disappeared. 80% of it disappeared in 3 weeks in March 2020, and the remainder disappeared when lockdown formally started on March the 23rd. Yeah. And it came back in September, and then we went into another lockdown, and that was the end of that. And we never.
But I suppose the learning is it's about resilience. I suppose it's about resilience, and it's about passion.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is, again, the point I was mentioning earlier, which I do keep banging on about, but I think we used technology to solve genuine customer problems. Why did Snap exist? Why did people love it? Which they did. We had the highest customer satisfaction of any intercity travel provider for the years that we existed. And why did we grow very quickly? Because customers found intercity travel expensive and inflexible, and yet there were 1,000 small family-owned coach companies out there that didn't have enough work. And we were able to create a digital platform that enabled people to book a far more flexible, far lower cost journey on one of those family-owned coach operators, and we were able to build an algorithm that guaranteed them a really high-quality ride. I mean, it was a particularly innovative idea. We stole the idea from Uber, but just using star ratings and a selection algorithm that emphasised star ratings, so there was incentive to drive quality. And we didn't start out by saying what do we need? What are we going to do with data? We started out by saying, okay, here's an opportunity to do something that makes customer journeys better and solves a real problem that coach operators are facing. What do we need to do? Where do we need? There were some areas where we needed to build quite complex algorithms. There were some areas where we didn't, but we were chasing down the solution to the problem.
Right, yeah. So it's about those outcomes all the time. You then ended up at TfL, and I mentioned that the Tube's 160th birthday in 2023. You created a daily series on LinkedIn highlighting your pick of 160 things about the Tube which you liked. What was your favourite in hindsight? And what did you miss out?
Oh, gosh. Well, if you want to know what I missed out, I did a 161st post, which listed all of another 100 things that I had missed out from my original 160.
Oh, right.
Because, trying to get it down to 160 things I love about the Tube was quite tough, as you can imagine, because there were obviously far more than 160 things that all of us individually must love about the Tube, given what a wonderful network it is. What am I going to choose as the number one? Oh, God, that's incredibly difficult. I think I'm going to choose Southwark Station, simply because I'm recording this in TfL's head office, which is fortunate to be opposite Southwark Station, which I think is the most beautiful station on the Underground. And if you don't know it, go on a day trip to Southwark Station. It is an absolutely stunning piece of architecture. It was built in 1999, and I won't say too much, but it is an incredible use of space, which is a very small site and a stunning piece of architecture.
And of course, 25 years old this year.
Absolutely.
You also included a film on LinkedIn made by your dad in the 1960s and set in the Aldwych branch of the Tube, about which you said you knew nothing. Have you found anything more about why was your dad making films in the Aldwych branch of the Tube?
Oh, this is amazing. This is, again, the extraordinary scale of TfL and the wonderful people who work for TfL. So my dad was a writer and a playwright. He was quite well known in the 1960s. He was an avant-garde playwright. And he made this film, and there was a scene set on the Tube, and it was some people travelling on the Underground. One of the fellow passengers suddenly leant forward and then fell onto the floor of the carriage, and as they hit the floor of the carriage, they smashed to bits because it turned out they were porcelain, and it turned out that all the other passengers in this carriage were actually porcelain. None of them were real human beings at all. That's literally I've now told you everything I knew about this film, other than that my dad hired the Aldwych branch of the Piccadilly line, because that line then only ran a few hours a day. But I did this post, and the TfL archives got in touch with me. And they said, we'll look for you if you like. And they found everything. They found all the booking forms, the invoices, the costings, the staff who'd been involved and what roles they'd played. They found the detailed instructions from the props, everything that was required, letters to invite. They found the whole lot. It was absolutely phenomenal. The timetable of the train, the special train, where it came from, what depot it went back. I mean, everything. It was all there. I was absolutely bowled over. I was bowled over by having all this stuff, my dad's career in the 60s, long before I was born. And seeing what he'd been up to. And of course, it was just staggeringly kind of them to go to that effort to help me fill in this gap.
No, but I suppose the Tube being so iconic, there's an awful lot of history about it, and there's an awful lot of people who collect an awful lot of history. So, I suppose, why would you be surprised? Well, let's talk a bit more about the transport, and let's talk about what's holding back wholesale transformation of the transport sector. What would you say are the key drivers for digital transformation? Is it about better, making it better for passengers, or is it about delivering more efficient operations?
They're the same thing, and it's really important we remember they're the same thing. But passenger needs are the absolute centre of everything we do. We only do this for passengers, but passengers benefit from more efficient operations, and they benefit from more efficient operations. A, because we can run more services on time, and B, because we can reduce the cost of doing what we do, which means that they can keep more of their own money, either as taxpayers or fare payers. But we should never lose sight of the fact that we're doing this for customers. And it comes back to the point, I've said it 3 times, but I'm going to keep saying it, which is we start by saying, what are the outcomes that we're trying to achieve? In some cases, that will require very significant investments. But, I'm always nervous when we start by saying, should we build a digital twin? we should start by saying, what are we trying to achieve? And in some cases, the team that are building, upgrading the Piccadilly line have built a stunning digital twin of the entire Piccadilly line, because they are literally transforming the Piccadilly line. And it's really useful to have a place to play and learn about what they're doing before they start doing it. We haven't built a digital twin of the Victoria line because that's not needed for now for what we're trying to achieve with that line, which was upgraded in 2009. So what do we need to achieve? That always is the first question. For us, it's 80% mode share by public transport and active travel. E-bikes, transformational. In other areas, actually doing more of what we do now is fine.
Yeah. Are you a user of e-bikes and e-scooters, by the way?
I am, yeah. I have a from Walthamstow to TfL's offices in Southwark. I can either get tube plus tube, which I do sometimes, or I can get tube plus train, which I do sometimes, or train plus walk, or train plus bike. And I kind of do a mixture of all of those on a daily basis. But one of those routes involves getting a bike across the City of London from Liverpool Street Station to Southwark. So I do that probably about five times a week, I'd guess.
Right, but not a scooter.
I find the sort of, if I'm going to do it, I prefer this to just a bit of activity. I think that's one of the joys about e-bikes is the fact. I also have my non-e-bike. I'm a cyclist, but there are limits to the distances you're going to want to go on a conventional pedal bike. E-bikes really increase the range, and for many people also create that sense that of ease. Not everyone wants to arrive hot and sweaty. E-bikes create that ease, but nevertheless, I do want to be able to do some pedaling. I do want to join in.
Well, scooters just terrify me, to be quite honest.
They are. We are doing a trial of rental e-scooters in London, and give it a go. Because it is a very different experience. They're not as terrifying as you may think. And in the London trial, the first time you make the journey, the speed is limited to half the subsequent speed. It's limited to 12.5 miles an hour after that. So it's very safe. We've had very, very strong safety results from the e-scooter trial. So you can use the TfL trial to get your first experience of an e-scooter.
I might take your word for that. Anyway, whenever we talk about data and digital technologies, the looming spectre of artificial intelligence comes in there. To what extent do you see this technology, really a machine learning, really there to help, to understand and better use data, or do you see it as a threat?
I certainly don't see it as a threat. I think it's fantastic that we've got another tool in our armoury to improve things for passengers. I mentioned earlier we're doing work with the buses team at the moment on how we can use data, machine learning, AI to improve efficiency of our bus networks. We're looking as TfL at using AI to improve management of the road network. So there's lots of exciting opportunities from AI, but we've always got to start with what problem are we trying to solve, and is AI a potential tool, as opposed to how can we use AI?
Right. Yeah. We talked a lot about leadership and actually having this kind of long-term vision. Who would you say has to lead this required change then? Is it about central government leadership? Is it about local government leadership? Or is it the private sector really got to come in there and drive this?
All of those. I think one of the challenges that we have in the world of transport, certainly outside London at the moment, is there does seem to be this slight element of not being clear who's in charge and who's making decisions. And of course, the reality is that if you've got the ecosystem right, everyone is in charge and everyone's making decisions, but all with the right incentives in place. So, TfL has a fantastic supply chain. That supply chain needs to be investing. TfL needs to be investing. But what I would like to see is as much as possible of that delegated down to small empowered teams. One of the things I'll be pushing through the business I'm setting up is that the more that decision making can be pushed down to close as possible to the front line, the better the decisions will get and the quicker the decisions will get. So if local teams running, whether however it's structured, whether it's local routes within Network Rail, whether it's local rail operators, whether it's local bus companies, whether that ownership structure is in the public sector or the private sector or in the local authority sector, if those teams have got the ability to make rapid decisions and to experiment and to iterate, then we will learn very quickly what works.
which presumably is where mayors and devolved administrations can really help to accelerate that.
Absolutely. And it's fantastic that we've seen more mayoral elections than ever before earlier this month. We will see a lot more and some trial and error is fantastic. Having different mayors running different places with different operating models, that's great because we'll see what works.
Well, look, next thing up for you is freewheeling. Once was a blog and now it's a business. What happens next with that? Where will we see that popping up then?
Yeah, absolutely. So I will bring back the blog. I love doing that, so I'm looking forward to doing that. It wouldn't have been appropriate to do that while I was at TfL. So I leave TfL on July the 15th. I will probably take a bit of time off over the summer with my children. So I will be starting both freewheeling the blog and freewheeling the business in September. And I'm very excited about it and looking forward to working with people who want some support and advice and guidance and mentoring and challenge and inspiration about, getting things done fast, about how they make decisions, how to embed agility, how to think about risk, all of these key questions. Because actually all the other questions we talk about how to do digital and how to do data, if you've got your decision making right, you've got your agility, you've calibrating your risk properly, all of those things are actually much easier to get done by local empowered teams. Well,
we look forward to keeping in touch with that venture and see how you get on, and hopefully bring you back to the podcast to talk about it when it's up and running, when it's all happening. So Thomas, thanks so much for joining me on the podcast today. Good luck with the new venture, and thanks for sharing what you've been up to at TfL.
Thank you very much. It's been wonderful. I've thoroughly enjoyed myself.
Thanks, Thomas. That's all we've got time for today, unfortunately, though. But we have got more from the Infrastructure podcast in the pipeline and more guests to talk to as we continue to probe the big issues faced across the sector. If you haven't done so already, do check out the Infrastructure podcast website, www.infrastructure-podcast.com, where you'll find background information and all the latest podcasts to listen to and to share. So thanks for joining us today. Thanks again to Thomas, and I look forward to seeing you again very soon.